And so we have to think back to last week and think about what a day they had had. They had heard great teaching from Jesus. They had literally seen a boy with his lunchbox feed 5,000 people. They had 12 baskets full of leftovers, which Jesus told them to collect and hold on to. Which, of course, they might have been thinking like last week when I was thinking, what for? But we're going to understand by the end of this what they needed the provision for. Because if you remember, Jesus escaped because they wanted to make him king. And if Jesus was made king, they'd be sitting pretty themselves now, wouldn't they? Talk about buying low, the apostles, coming in when Jesus was just a little carpenter kind of person. And now, oh yeah, they want him to be king. Oh, that's right, Jesus. No, we don't want to do that. Yeah, okay, that's right. Yeah, we're humble about this. Deep inside, I think a lot of the apostles, the disciples at that point, were excited about the miracle Jesus did and about the prospects for the ministry and the direction they were going. And they're getting stirred up and they're starting to make plans. But like a bunch of 6-year-olds trying to build a house, you know it's not going to work out. Things are going to start to go in a lot of different directions. And really the first part of this, evening came, disciples went down to the lake. Mark tells us that Jesus sent them in the boat across the lake. So we're going to have to take some details from the other accounts. That's important so you know that they're not in disobedience by doing this. It's absolutely clear that Jesus told them to do this. Otherwise, you might infer that when the storms come, just like simple-minded Christians do today, when storms come and trials come, that you're not walking the way Jesus wants you to walk. So Jesus sends them out. He sends them out on this lake, but things are going to change so fast from the day they've had. It's kind of like sometimes you have a great spiritual experience. You feel like, I am just going to be so strong, probably forever. And then you get like a headache for a half an hour. And you're like, what was that just happened? You forget all about it, okay? So let's go to the lake. This is the Sea of Galilee. Interestingly enough, it's 69 square miles, which is almost the exact same size as Lake Winnipesaukee. So now we can understand how big a lake it was. We have a feel for that. Pretty good-sized lake, certainly not Lake Michigan. It's about 7 miles across in its longest distance. The way it's situated, there's some hills around it, so it tends to be windy there. So the disciples go down to the lake. Now remember, a few of them were fishermen. So these are fishermen getting into a boat. This is like for us getting into a car. The boat. It's fascinating when you start studying Scripture a little deeper. I just said, what did the boat look like, I wonder? So sure enough, wouldn't you know that just recently, in the last few years, somebody found a boat that was dated to within 100 years of Jesus' time. And they call it the Jesus boat because this is what boats looked like in Jesus' day. And if that looks like just a little bit of bark to you, that's what it looks like to me. These things were glorified rowboats, okay? This is 20 feet long. And this is actually the era of boats and could have even been a boat of one of the apostles. That's how close to the time of Jesus it is by carbon dating. So we know that these are boats from that era, just like you can tell a car today from what era you're in. So anyways, they're in this boat. They start going across Capernaum. It was now dark. They had a long day, and it's dark. And Jesus hadn't joined them. He had gone up to the mountains to pray. Verse 18, a strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough. Remember, the lake was in the middle of these hill area, and a wind tunnel would form across the lake. I can remember I was in Boston one time in these wind tunnels when I would have to, I lived in Boston. When I came back to my house one time, it's amazingly powerful, the wind from the tunnels of the buildings nearby. As you can imagine, the water when they started was smooth. And then as they start to go out and the wind gets going, it says the water grew rough. Unfortunately, the English doesn't carry the sense of what kind of storm we're talking about here. The actual water, the way it's described in the Greek, is that they became agitated, troubled, upset. And the literal meaning of the word is the waters were put in motion what should be still. So they're out there, the water's still. Jesus says, go, okay, we'll meet you. Boom, they go out for a while, and we all know that feeling of all of a sudden a storm hitting. And just literally the water stirred to a boil. And so there's a tempest. You're in this little bark, the Jesus boat. You're not on some ocean liner here that's 8 stories high. And you got no motor. You've got no flares. You're just rowing. You're taking turns rowing. Remember the bread that he gave them. He knew they would need that provision, the energy. And so it says they were rowing. It says that the time they were at in one of the other Gospels says that it was about 3 o'clock in the morning at this point. They were 3 miles across. What 3 miles is it's about halfway, just beyond halfway to where they were going. It's what I would describe as the point of no return. Because the wind is blowing in their face. They've just gone past halfway. And what does that mean, the point of no return? When continuing on his or her course of action becomes less difficult than turning back, because turning back is physically impossible, prohibitively expensive, or dangerous. It's also used when the distance or effort required to get back is greater than the remainder of the journey or task to be taken. Plain English, they couldn't go back. They had to keep going. It's used in aviation, particularly with planes. When they fuel up from the and go off their base, there's a point at which, if they keep going, they know they're not coming back. It's the point of no return. And so this is what they had hit. They were spent, tired, up for 24 hours, just wiped out here. Okay? They saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on water. Now, in another passage in Mark, it specifically says that they thought he was a ghost. A phantom is the literal word in the Greek. And they were terrified. So if you weren't terrified because it was dark, because it's 3 a.m, because it's a storm, because you're in this little boat, because there's 12 people on it, because you're claustrophobic, because it's stormy, because the water's starting to tread, because you're exhausted, because you're afraid to drown. If all that isn't enough, which for some of them they probably were still pretty okay, then you see what you think is a ghost. Okay? Now you can just say, well, that's just silly. They see a ghost. Well, they saw something that they could not explain. It's amazing when I was reading about phobias and what people fear. Like almost everything that they're going through, fear of traveling, fear of being out in the water, fear of being confined, fear of being in close spaces, fear of the dark, fear of ghosts, fear of dying, fear of the unknown. Like almost out of the top 10, there's like 6 of them that's happening right now. And I started writing down these things, okay? They had themosanophobia, fear of the dark, achlorophobia, fear of travel, hodophobia, fear of water, fear of the unknown, thanophobia, fear of storms. It was storming, astrophobia, claustrophobia, fear of close places, agoraphobia, fear of being outside. I mean, now these names sound funny. You know, when people mention them, there's an old Peanuts thing where Charlie Brown or Lucy or somebody's listing all these phobias. But it's actually not funny when you have a fear of something. It may be funny to somebody else, but it's certainly not funny to you. And so people may fear ghosts or dread contact. Now, the Christian would quickly say, well, if they're in hell, they're not getting out. And if they're in heaven, they don't want to get out. And that's an okay answer for your children as far as fear of ghosts in terms of human spirits coming back. And I'm not here to talk about demons and things that can appear as ghosts and things, because it's just not what we're going to talk about today. So I think that's the simple answer for right now. But here comes Jesus. Now, I started to say, well, why did he do it? Why did he do it this way? Why did he walk out like this? And then I was like, well, how else can he do it? You see, if he just appeared in the boat, you don't think they wouldn't have had a heart attack then either? You see? So, I mean, it's this sort of thing is you know, when I'm on the treadmill in the morning, my wife comes over to me and scares the death out of me when she comes behind me. And she just says, well, how else am I going to come up to you? How else am I, do you want me to just appear in front of you or something like that, like Star Trek or something? You see, so Jesus is walking over. He's doing an unbelievable, crazy miracle showing that he has power over the water, okay, and over the elements. But really what we're going to be talking about is his power over fear. It says that he was walking in the Greek. The word walking or approaching that they use is an interesting word. It's not the standard word for taking a walk. It's actually the word, I had to look this up. It's a walking especially as proof of ability. He actually, it says, the point of the Greek is that he was showing them, hey, I'm walking on the water here. I can relate it to when I have patients that have had amputations. And the first time they come to my office back and they have a prosthesis in, and they're walking with their prosthesis, they always come in and they walk and they show, hey, check this out, I'm walking again. They're very proud of what they're doing. That's the word that's used. So let's talk about this. It says they were terrified in one translation, frightened, fearful. What is fear? Fear is, some people say, a basic human emotion, like sadness or anger or joy. We also know that there's a biochemical cause of fear, which is the sympathetic nervous system, which is called fight or flight, adrenaline. You either run or you fight, and we know the excitement of the heart beating and, different things that happen when we're afraid. But there's a deeper layer of fear. The deeper layer of fear is what I would describe as paralyzing fear. That is fear where you are so afraid you just shake. You can't move. I would say that that's the kind of fear that they had. They had nowhere they could go anyways. If they jumped in the water, they were dead. There were no life preservers then. They were 3 miles from shore, or so they thought. We know for kids, it's natural for kids to have fear. I want my mommy. I want my daddy. And if anything's ever bad happened to us, that certainly leaves an impression on us. Once burned, twice shy. I was driving my car in Florida, and I just got hit, going 40, 50 miles an hour. Somebody ran a red light and just plowed into me, totaled my vehicle. When I went through intersections for the next year, I felt like every person was going to hit me. And it took a while to wear off, especially when I was in the passenger side. It was weird. It took a while to have that feeling wear off. So then we have Jesus. He says to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." And the whole point of this message, I'm just trying to this is such a familiar story for some of us that I'm trying to just set the table here again for this very purpose of that this message is about overcoming fear. And when you think about overcoming fear, think about that word, that compound English word, overcome. Flip it around. Like in Spanish, words are flipped or whatever. Or they would say the English words are. But the idea is you must come over the fear. So to come over fear, of course, you must face fear. Flush, straight on, head on fear. You must deal with it. You cannot run away from it. I just wrote, fear is an emotion, not a deduction or something logical. You can't talk yourself out of it because it's not something that's just mental, although people make as though it is. It's spiritual. It's in the heart. The real deep, deep fear. Now, somebody could say, well, I know somebody who has this mental disorder and all this, whatever. That's fine. I'm not speaking as a doctor or trying to address any of these things. I'm speaking about the spiritual fear that we all know that inhibits us from doing what God wants us to do, that affects our day-to-day life. They were afraid. They heard his voice. And you can imagine that when they heard his voice, it calmed them. Because it says, then they were willing to take him in the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Now, there's a couple things going on here. One is, all of a sudden, they're at the shore, which very most likely is another miracle. But, and Matthew talks about how there is the moment where Peter tries to go out of the water and falls in and all that stuff. I don't want to talk about that today. I want to talk about why John made a point to say, bam, they were at the shore. And one of the things I think I would say is that worry gives a small thing a big shadow. You see, maybe there was a miracle transport, but maybe they were closer to the shore than they knew, too. They couldn't see it. I can relate a little bit. I was out swimming in California. I was newly married. I was with Crystal before we had kids. And it was very cold, and the waves were very deep, very high. And when I got out there, I was having fun till all of a sudden it got crazy in the water. There was nobody in the water around. And a riptide was there, and I said, I've had enough. My neck hurt from one of the waves cracking over my head. I don't happen to have a neck like Rob Gronkowski, who lands on his neck catching touchdown passes. Mine isn't as big as a telephone pole like his, so my neck was sore. I was scared. I felt like a rag doll. So I went to put my feet down, and I realized I was over my head. And then I realized I can't get in. I can't swim. And I remember thinking, oh, my gosh, I can't believe this is it right here. This is what people must think about before they drown. I can't believe it. I'm perfectly away. I'm at the point, and with all my might, I swam to the shore. And I was a young man, and I was in very good condition. And I reached the point of exhaustion where if you're lifting or something, where you can do no more. And I can remember the feeling, and I didn't alert Crystal. I didn't want anything to happen, that I just let go inside. And I gave up and said, I'm not going to make it. I just remember and boom, I hit the sand. I was close enough that my feet touched as I just gave up and said, I'm letting myself go. And that feeling of That fear of, and I'm not saying that I was afraid to die or anything, but just that, you're holding this rope, you're in the dark, I'm going to die if I let go, and you let go and you fall 1 inch. Fear is the great exaggerator, is my point. Okay, I don't know if I made that point with that story, but that's what I'm trying to get at. Because they were at the shore, you see, just instantly, fear was overcome. The waters were calm. What happened when they met Jesus with the fear? Number one, they were with someone that made them not afraid. And that is the case. I have another story of Cassia when she was just a small child, under 3 years old, when she was walking on a deck out by the water or anything that was high. She became, when kids, they say kids will do crazy things because they have no fear. What they have is no awareness of danger, okay? Which can be a healthy thing at times. But she, at a young age, was perceptive that she was potentially in danger. Now, it looked silly because the dock was 6 feet wide and she was about, 2 feet high, so she'd have to roll 4 times head over heels before she'd fall in the water. But she became aware of the fact the dock's moving a little, she could fall in. And all of a sudden, when she just had walked up the stairs on our hallway to their rooms, she would crouch down when she was walking. The railings were 4 feet high. She'd have to flip over them to fall. And I looked at her and I wanted to laugh because there's something silly about fear. But then I said, oh my gosh, this is very important. And so I just looked her in the eyes. I said, we're right here. Don't be afraid. I might have given her a cookie if she went across too, but something like that. And I'll tell you something. All of a sudden, something clicked inside of her, and she just walked right across these areas. And I've seen her jump off mountains, and I can tell you something. That kid is not afraid. So what's the point of the story? Okay? The point of the story is that at any age, we can face our fears. And the sooner, the better. The sooner you face your fears, the better you will be in your life. The earlier do it. But there's no time that's too late. There's a couple other things. Jesus was on the mountain when the fears happened. He was watching them. He was watching them. Faith puts fear to flight because faith says, he sent me. He told me to go. He's watching me. That positions you. Faith positions you. When the fear exaggerates like a cat standing as its hair up on its back to attack, you can still punt that thing across the room. It's not that scary. I'm not recommending you do that. For any cat lovers. The other thing is that when you hear his voice, because it's a voice that loves you, it calms you. There's something about whether it be an infant, a child, or for all of us, a familiar voice will calm you when you have fear. A lot of fears have to do with things that you feel that you have to face alone. The second you know Jesus is there, a lot of fears will be put to flight. Feed your faith, you'll starve your fears. Fear imprisons, faith liberates. Fear paralyzes, faith empowers. Fear sickens, faith heals. Fear is the sand in the machinery of life. Faith is the oil. Fear imprisons. How does it imprison? You put up walls to protect yourself, but then they just are your prison. That's fear. Faith liberates. It overcomes. Fear paralyzes. Remember the deepest of fears, you're frozen? Faith empowers. Fear sickens. Believe me, Anxious, nervous people, it sickens you to your core. Faith heals. And then fear, the sand in the machinery of life, just getting you completely just clogged up, slowing you down. Some people would look at this story as a story about another one of these goofy disciples and what they, just how could they have gotten afraid or anything like that. But I hope from just us spending some time on this, you just say, hey, that's no different than me right there when I face things. I'm just like them. I just want to be like them too and let Jesus into the boat with me. Let him come in with me and join me and be with me so that I'll be calm. And these fears will be put to flight.